The Daily Telegraph exclusively reported this morning that the first lockdown measures only saved around 1,700 lives. Scientists from Johns Hopkins University say lockdowns had negligible impact compared to the colossal collateral effect on young people, education and the economy. A, quote, policy failure of gigantic proportions, a drop in the bucket compared to the staggering collateral costs imposed. This is really serious because lockdown seemed to have been accepted and popular, but they were in fact based on Professor Neil Ferguson's hysterical modelling forecasting that 500,000 lives would be lost without action. And we now know that those models weren't right. If you look at comparisons between harsh lockdowns and the more voluntary methods, such as Sweden used, there's only a small mortality difference of about 3.2%. With business closures that were associated with actually a 7.5% fall in mortality, balanced by gathering limits linked to a 5.9% increase in death rates. So although they squeezed the balloon in one area, the balloon expanded in other areas, which meant that the overall effect wasn't that successful. And the Telegraph report, not only this, but that the COVID disinformation unit monitored social media and asked companies to remove posts it considered to be potentially harmful content. Now, why is this important? Because if you wanted to put the counter-argument, if you put it on Facebook or you put it on Twitter, or even if you wrote about it in newspapers, the government was trying to stop you. And I was a minister in the government at the time, and I certainly didn't know that this sort of thing was going on, because one of the best ways in a democracy to stop bad policy making is freedom of speech, so that people can stand up and say this is a bad policy. But that was being deliberately squeezed out of the system by, to my mind, improper use of governmental power. As we know, Boris Johnson, when he agreed to the lockdown, said he did so with a heavy heart and that no Prime Minister would want to do it, but it was thought to be essential to save thousands of lives. Now, the government claims that it's going to learn from the COVID inquiry's findings, which will play a key role in informing planning and preparations for the future. The problem is we've already seen the growing power of groupthink in the blob, which hasn't yet been challenged. And that's a key issue because the inquiry will only have sensible answers if it challenges what was done before. Unfortunately, if you look at the 150 questions that it sent to Boris Johnson, some of which are purely gossipy, fascinating, but just gossip. If the inquiry goes down the route of those questions, not just the gossipy ones, it looks as if it's concerned that lockdown wasn't harsh enough, not whether or not lockdown was right in the first place. And so that's what we need to be thinking about, not whether Boris talked about injecting himself with COVID in the early days. All that's completely irrelevant. It's about, was the lockdown right? And if the inquiry goes down the route of endless gossipy emails and text messages and WhatsApp messages and trying to prove that it should have been a harsher lockdown, the question will be, is Lady Hallett wasting everybody's time? But of course, I want to know what you think. Mailmog@gbnews.com.